The crystal chandelier above table 7 at Le Petit Chateau cast diamonds of light across Fallon's face as her husband's laughter rang out like breaking glass. He was speaking French, fluid, elegant French, and the words slicing through the air weren't compliments. "She's decorative, nothing more," Cade said to the silver-haired man across from them, his smile never faltering. "Beautiful enough to look at, but utterly empty upstairs. I keep her around because she photographs well." Fallon's hand didn't shake as she lifted her wine glass. Her smile stayed painted on like the lipstick she'd carefully applied 3 hours earlier. But inside, every word he spoke in that language he thought she couldn't understand was carving her heart into smaller and smaller pieces. And here's what he didn't know, what nobody at that table knew. She understood every single word. Before we get into how this night became the most expensive dinner of Cade's life, hit that like button if you've ever been underestimated. And stick around, because what Fallon does next will leave you speechless. Subscribe so you don't miss out on any story. 6 years. That's how long Fallon had been married to Cade Brenner, heir to the Brenner technology empire that stretched across California, New York, and half of Texas. 6 years of playing the role he'd written for her. The quiet wife, the pretty accessory, the woman who smiled at his business partners and said very little. She'd met him at a charity gala in Greenwich, Connecticut. She was 23, working 3 jobs to pay off her mother's medical bills, serving champagne to people who spent more on their watches than she made in a year. He was 28, magnetic, confident, and when he'd looked at her that night, she'd felt seen for the first time in forever. "You're different," he'd told her on their 3rd date, walking along the harbor as sailboats bobbed in the distance. "Not like those other women who only care about money and status." Looking back now, Fallon wondered if that was when the lie began. Or maybe it was always there, hiding behind his perfect smile. Their wedding had been in Martha's Vineyard, 300 guests, orchids flown in from Ecuador, a dress that cost more than her childhood home. His family had been polite but distant. His mother, Cordelia, had pulled her aside before the ceremony. "Cade has very specific expectations," she'd said, her voice smooth as silk and twice as cold. "The Brenner name means something. I trust you understand the importance of maintaining appearances." Fallon had nodded, nervous and eager to please. She should have run right then. Tonight was supposed to be important. Cade had been talking about this dinner for 3 weeks. Jean-Luc Messier, a French investor worth somewhere in the hundreds of millions, was considering a partnership with Brenner Technology. The deal could expand their reach into European markets, Cade had explained, and everything needed to be perfect. "Wear the blue dress," he'd told her that morning, barely looking up from his phone. "The one that shows your shoulders. And keep your hair down." Messier's old-fashioned, he likes women who look feminine. She'd wanted to ask what he meant by that. Instead, she just nodded. The restaurant was in downtown San Francisco, the kind of place where reservations required 3 months' notice and knowing someone who knew someone. Fallon had been here twice before, always sitting quietly while Cade conducted business, always ordering whatever he suggested. Jean-Luc Messier was already seated when they arrived. 60-something, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, with silver hair swept back and sharp blue eyes that seemed to calculate everything. He stood when they approached, kissing Fallon's hand in that old-world way. "Enchanted," he said in accented English. "This is my wife, Fallon," Cade said, his hand on her lower back, possessive, controlling. "She's thrilled to join us tonight." Fallon smiled. "It's wonderful to meet you, Mr. Messier." The older man's eyes lingered on her for a moment, something curious flickering there, before he turned his attention back to Cade. And that's when it started. They'd been seated maybe 10 minutes when Cade switched languages. It happened so smoothly she almost didn't notice the shift. One moment they were discussing market trends in English, the next Cade was laughing about something in rapid French, and Jean-Luc was responding in kind. Fallon kept her expression neutral, pleasant. She'd learned this skill over 6 years, how to look engaged without actually participating, how to be present without being seen. "Your English is excellent," Jean-Luc said to Cade, still in French. "Where did you study?" "Sorbonne, for 2 years," Cade replied, also in French. "My father insisted." He said you can't do business in Europe without understanding the culture. Wise man. Jean-Luc glanced at Fallon. And your wife? Does she speak French? Cade's laugh was light, dismissive. Fallon. No. She barely finished college before we met. Languages aren't really her strength. The words landed like a slap. Fallon reached for her water glass, her hand steady. Inside, something cold was spreading through her chest. Ah, Jean-Luc said, his expression unreadable. I see. Don't worry about her, Cade continued in French, his voice easy, confident. She's perfectly happy shopping and decorating the house. I handle the complicated things. Complicated things. Fallon had a master's degree in international business from Columbia. She'd graduated summa cum laude. She'd been fluent in French since she was 16, thanks to 2 years living in Lyon with her mother's sister while her mom fought cancer the first time. But Cade didn't know any of that. She'd never told him. Why? Because by the time she'd realized he might want to know, really know, who she was, it had become clear he preferred the version he'd created in his head. The simple girl he'd rescued from poverty. The grateful wife who asked no questions and made no demands. And she'd been so tired. So ground down by her mother's death, by debt, by years of fighting just to survive. When Cade offered her a life where she didn't have to struggle anymore, she'd taken it. She'd thought maybe love would grow. Maybe they'd become partners. She'd been wrong. The appetizers arrived, some kind of foie gras preparation that probably cost more than her monthly car payment back when she'd had a car. Cade and Jean-Luc continued their conversation in French, and Fallon continued to smile politely while she understood every word. The markets are shifting, Jean-Luc was saying. This partnership needs to be built on trust. I need to know the people I'm working with. Of course, Cade agreed. Complete transparency. Tell me about your marriage, Jean-Luc said suddenly, switching topics. 6 years, you said. Yes. Cade cut into his food. Best decision I ever made, honestly. Oh. She's exactly what I needed. Cade's tone was warm, almost affectionate, if you didn't understand the words. Someone who won't question me or interfere with business. Someone who looks good at events and doesn't cause problems. Fallon's fork scraped against her plate. That's important to you? Jean-Luc asked. A wife who doesn't participate. God, yes. Cade laughed. My first girlfriend was this nightmare corporate lawyer type. Everything was a debate. Everything was a power struggle. With Fallon, there's none of that. She knows her place. Knows her place. The words hung in the air like smoke. I see, Jean-Luc said quietly. Cade leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, completely at ease. Between you and me, I'll probably trade her in eventually. Maybe in a few years when I'm 40. She's starting to show her age, and there are always younger, fresher options. Fallon's heart stopped. Actually stopped. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The restaurant around her became distant, muffled, like she was underwater. Trade her in. Like she was a car. A piece of furniture. Something disposable. She'd known the marriage was struggling. Had known for at least 2 years that the distance between them had grown too wide to cross. But this. Hearing him discuss replacing her like she was nothing, like 6 years meant nothing. You're quiet tonight, darling, Cade said suddenly in English, turning to her with that smile he used in photos. Everything okay? Fallon met his eyes. Those green eyes she'd once thought were beautiful. Now they just looked cold. I'm fine, she said softly. Just listening. See. He switched back to French, addressing Jean-Luc. Perfect wife material. Knows when to be quiet. Jean-Luc's expression had changed. Something harder had entered those sharp blue eyes. Mr. Brenner, he said carefully, still in French, I'm beginning to think we may not be compatible business partners after all. Cade's confidence faltered for just a second. I'm sorry. I don't understand. A man who speaks about his wife this way, Jean-Luc continued, makes me question his character, his integrity. I was just being honest. Were you? Jean-Luc's voice was soft but cutting. Or were you showing off? Demonstrating your dominance to impress me? Cade's jaw tightened. With all due respect, sir, what happens in my marriage is my business. And who you are as a man is mine. When I'm considering trusting you with hundreds of millions of dollars. The tension at the table had shifted. Fallon could feel it like electricity in the air. Cade forced a laugh. You're right, of course. I apologize. Sometimes I speak too freely. It's not personal, she doesn't understand anyway. And there it was. The assumption that had protected him all night. The assumption that was about to destroy everything. Fallon set down her fork with deliberate care. Her hands were shaking now, but not from fear. From rage. From 6 years of biting her tongue and playing small and pretending to be someone she wasn't. 6 years of being invisible in her own marriage. She looked at Jean-Luc, and their eyes met across the table. Something passed between them, understanding, maybe. Recognition. Mr. Messiah, she said quietly in English, may I ask you something? Of course, madam. You mentioned earlier that trust is the foundation of any good partnership. Do you really believe that? I do. Cade was watching her with a puzzled expression, clearly confused by her suddenly speaking up. Then I think there's something you should know, Fallon continued. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Something important about the man you're considering working with. Fallon, Cade's voice held a warning edge. She ignored him. You see, my husband believes I'm simple. Uneducated. Incapable of understanding complex conversations. She paused. He believes this because I've allowed him to believe it. Jean-Luc leaned forward slightly, his attention completely focused on her. But the truth is, Fallon said, and now she switched, smooth as silk, perfect as glass, to flawless French, I've understood every single word spoken at this table tonight. The color drained from Cade's face. Every insult, she continued in French, her voice steady despite the tears burning behind her eyes. Every dismissal. Every cruel joke made at my expense. Fallon, Cade started. Including, she said, her words precise and cold, your plans to go replace me with a younger model when I become inconvenient. The silence that followed was deafening. Remember where we left off. Fallon just revealed to her husband Cade, in perfect French, that she's understood every horrible thing he's said about her at this business dinner. His face. White as the tablecloth. Jean-Luc Messiah, the investor. Watching this unfold like it's the best show he's seen in years. Now, let's see what happens when an underestimated woman finally stops playing small. Cade's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. You speak French. His voice came out strangled. Fallon tilted her head, still speaking in that language he'd weaponized against her just minutes ago. I've spoken French since I was 16. I lived in Lyon for 2 years. But you never asked about my life before you, did you? You never asked about anything that mattered. Why didn't you tell me? The question was so absurd she almost laughed. Why didn't I tell you? She leaned forward, her voice dropping to something dangerous. Because 6 months into our marriage, I tried to discuss international expansion strategies for your company, my actual field of study, and you patted my head and told me not to worry about big boy business. Cade flinched. I tried to tell you I had ideas, she continued. Opinions. Knowledge. And you made it very clear that what you wanted was a decoration, not a partner. Jean-Luc was watching this exchange with the focus of a hawk. He hadn't touched his wine in minutes. So I became what you wanted, Fallon said. The quiet wife. The pretty accessory who knows her place. She paused, letting those last 3 words sink in. And in the process, I disappeared. Fallon, I didn't mean. Yes, you did. Her voice cracked slightly. Every word you spoke tonight, you meant. You meant it when you called me empty-headed. You meant it when you said you'd replace me. You meant all of it. Cade's face had gone from white to red. He looked at Jean-Luc, desperately trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Sir, this is a misunderstanding. Is it? Jean-Luc's voice was quiet. Because from where I'm sitting, your wife has just demonstrated more honesty and courage than you've shown all evening. She's being emotional. She's being truthful. Jean-Luc set down his napkin with finality. Mr. Brenner, I came to San Francisco to find a partner I could trust. Someone with integrity. Character. He stood. I'm afraid I haven't found that person. Panic flashed across Cade's features. Please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. A man who treats his wife as you've described is not someone I can trust with my family's fortune. Jean-Luc turned to Fallon, switching to English. Madam, it has been a true pleasure. I'm sorry this evening has caused you pain. Then, in French, he added something that made Cade's panic turn to genuine fear. If you're ever interested in consulting work, I have contacts who would value your expertise. Someone with your education and language skills, and your grace under pressure, would be quite an asset. He placed a business card on the table in front of her. Then he was gone, leaving Cade and Fallon sitting in the wreckage of their marriage. The silence stretched between them like broken glass. You just cost me $300 million, Cade finally said, his voice shaking with rage. Fallon looked at him, really looked at him. This man she'd loved, or thought she'd loved. This man she'd built her life around. No, she said quietly. You cost yourself that deal the moment you opened your mouth. If you hadn't said anything. If I hadn't said anything. Her voice rose. If I had just sat there and continued to let you humiliate me. Is that what you wanted? I was networking. Building rapport. You were mocking your wife to impress a stranger. People at nearby tables were starting to stare. Cade noticed, his jaw clenching. Lower your voice, he hissed. Why? Fallon stood, her chair scraping against the floor. Worried about appearances. About what people might think. Sit down. No. The single word hung between them. Cade's eyes narrowed. Sit down. We're going to finish this dinner, go home, and discuss this privately like adults. We're not going home. Excuse me. Fallon reached for her purse, her hands steadier than they'd been all night. I'm leaving. Tonight. Right now. You're being ridiculous. Am I? She laughed, and it sounded foreign to her own ears. You just told a complete stranger that you plan to replace me. That I'm showing my age. That I'm decorative but empty. Her voice broke. 6 years. Cade. I gave you 6 years. Fallon. You don't even know me. The tears were coming now, hot and angry. You married me, but you never even tried to know who I actually am. That's not fair. Fair. She wiped her eyes, not caring about the mascara probably streaming down her face. You want to talk about fair? I put my career on hold for you. Turned down job offers. Made myself smaller and quieter and less than I was because that's what you needed. And tonight I learned it was all for nothing. Cade reached for her hand. She pulled away. Don't touch me. We can fix this, he said, and for the first time that night, he sounded almost sincere. Almost desperate. We can go to counseling, work this out. You can't counsel away contempt, Fallon said softly. And that's what I heard in your voice tonight. Contempt. You don't respect me. Maybe you never did. That's not true. Then tell me one thing about my childhood. One story I've shared with you. One dream I had before we met. Silence. Tell me what I studied in college. My favorite book. Why I learned French in the first place. More silence. You can't, she whispered. Because you never asked. In 6 years, you never once asked who I was before I became Mrs. Brenner. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. If you walk away from this table, don't come back. Fallon looked over her shoulder. Is that a threat? It's reality. You leave, it's over. The house, the cars, the lifestyle, all of it gone. You'll have nothing. For a moment, fear flickered through her. He was right, legally, everything was in his name. His family's lawyers had made sure of that. If she left, She'd be starting over from zero. But then she thought about the last 6 years. About shrinking herself. About pretending. About dying slowly in a gilded cage. Nothing. She smiled, and it was sad and bitter and somehow free. I already have nothing, Cade. I've had nothing for years. I just didn't realize it until tonight. You're making a mistake. No. The mistake was believing that being loved meant making myself smaller. That was the mistake. She walked away then, through the restaurant with its crystal chandeliers and its wealthy diners and its silent witnesses. Walked out into the San Francisco night with nothing but her purse and the business card Jean-Luc had left her. Behind her, she could hear Cade calling her name. She didn't look back. The law offices of Chen, Martinez and Associates occupied the 42nd floor of a building in downtown Seattle. Rain streaked the windows as Fallon sat across from her attorney, reviewing documents. "He's fighting everything," Ren Martinez said, sliding another folder across the desk. The prenup his lawyers drew up was pretty airtight. But, Ren smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. But they made one critical error. The prenup was drafted assuming you had no education and no career prospects. They included a clause stating you'd receive minimal support because you brought nothing of value to the marriage. Fallon's stomach twisted. "However," Ren continued, "we've proven that's fraudulent. You had a master's degree, job offers, career prospects. You gave those up at his request. That changes things significantly." "How significantly?" "You're looking at a 7-figure settlement. Maybe 8, depending on how hard we push." The number should have made her happy. Instead, she just felt empty. "There's something else," Ren said carefully. "We've received a character witness request from an unexpected source." "Who?" "Jean-Luc Messia." Fallon looked up sharply. "Apparently he's been following the case," Ren explained. "He's willing to testify about what he witnessed that night. About your husband's behavior and statements." "Why would he do that?" Ren shrugged. "Maybe he believes in justice. Or maybe," she paused, "he meant what he said about the consulting work. His assistant called last week. They want to schedule an interview." The interview happened 2 weeks later in a sleek office building in Manhattan. Fallon wore a navy suit she'd bought herself. Not designer, not expensive, but hers. Earned with money from the part-time work she'd picked up teaching French to business students online. The man who met her wasn't Jean-Luc, but his director of European operations. A sharp woman named Thea Ashford with silver glasses and an intense gaze. "Your resume is impressive," Thea said, scanning the documents. "Columbia, dual focus in international business and economics, fluent in 3 languages." 3. Fallon blinked. "French, Spanish, and English. According to your transcripts." Right. She'd almost forgotten about the Spanish. Another thing she'd stopped using when Cade had made it clear he preferred her quiet. The interview lasted 2 hours. They discussed market trends, cultural differences in business practices, expansion strategies. For the first time in years, Fallon felt her brain actually working, not just surviving, but thinking, analyzing, creating. It felt like waking up. "We'll be in touch," Thea said at the end, shaking her hand. Fallon didn't let herself hope. Hope was dangerous. The offer came 3 days later. Director of International Relations. 6-figure salary. Based in New York with frequent travel to Paris and Lyon. Start date in 6 weeks. She cried when she read it. Sat in her tiny studio apartment, the one she'd rented with the last of her savings, and cried until there was nothing left. The divorce was final on a Tuesday. Fallon sat in the courtroom and watched the judge sign the papers that ended her marriage. Cade was there with his lawyers, looking older somehow. Smaller. He'd tried to fight the settlement. His lawyers had argued and threatened and dragged things out as long as possible. But in the end, the evidence was overwhelming. The prenup was thrown out. Fallon walked away with enough money to rebuild, to start over, to breathe. As they left the courtroom, Cade caught her arm in the hallway. "Was it worth it?" he asked quietly. Fallon looked at him. Really looked at him. Searched for any trace of the man she'd thought she'd married. Was what worth it? Destroying everything. Our life. My reputation. That business deal. She almost laughed. Even now, he didn't understand. You destroyed those things, Cade. Not me. I just stopped pretending not to notice. I would have treated you better, he said, and he actually sounded like he believed it. If you just talked to me. I tried. For years, I tried. You just never listened. She pulled her arm free gently. I hope you find someone who fits better into the role you created, she said. Someone who actually wants to be decoration. Because I finally remembered I'm more than that. She walked away then, out of the courthouse and into the bright spring afternoon. Her phone buzzed. A text from Thea, Leon office confirmed. You're leading the expansion team. Congratulations. Fallon smiled. For the first time in 6 years, it reached her eyes. The charity gala in Lyon was everything the event planners had promised. Elegant, sophisticated, filled with important people doing important work. Fallon moved through the crowd in a dress the color of midnight, speaking French with donors, English with international guests, making connections, building bridges. She was good at this. She'd always been good at this. She just hadn't been allowed to show it. Madam Brenner, pardon, Madam Riley, a familiar voice said behind her. You look well. She turned to find Jean-Luc Messier, still silver-haired, still sharp-eyed, smiling at her with genuine warmth. Mr. Messier. What a lovely surprise. I heard you were leading this event. I couldn't miss it. He gestured to the room. Quite an accomplishment. Thank you. Your company's donation made much of this possible. The donation was just money. This, he indicated the crowd, the energy, the purpose, this is vision. Execution. Leadership. Fallon felt herself blushing slightly. I wanted to ask you something, Jean-Luc said. That night at Le Petit Chateau in San Francisco. When did you decide to speak up? She considered the question. Honestly, I think I'd been deciding for 6 years. That night was just when I finally couldn't stay silent anymore. It took courage. It took rage, she corrected with a small smile. But maybe they're the same thing sometimes. Indeed. He paused. I saw your ex-husband recently, at a conference in Boston. Fallon's chest tightened. How is he? Bitter. Angry. Blaming everyone but himself. Jean-Luc's expression was thoughtful. He asked if I regretted pulling out of the deal with his company. What did you tell him? The truth. That I've never regretted it for a moment. And that hiring you was one of the best business decisions I've made in 40 years. Tears pricked at her eyes unexpectedly. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me. You did the work. You took the risk. I just recognized talent when I saw it. He smiled. Even when it was being hidden. Later that night, alone in her Paris apartment, Fallon stood by the window looking out at the city lights. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago. Sitting in that restaurant, hearing herself described as decoration. As nothing. As replaceable. She thought about how close she'd come to staying. To accepting that version of herself. To believing that was all she deserved. Her phone buzzed. A message in the divorce group chat she joined. Women supporting women through the worst times of their lives. Just left. Finally. Scared but free. Did I do the right thing? Fallon typed quickly. You did the hardest thing. The bravest thing. And yes, it was right. I promise you, it was right. Another message. How do you know? She smiled, thinking of everything she'd learned. Everything she'd become. Because you can't build a life on lies. Not even comfortable ones. And you can't love someone who needs you to be small. The response came quickly. What if I fail? Then you fail, Fallon typed. But at least you'll fail as yourself. And that's worth everything. She set down her phone and returned to the window. Tomorrow she had meetings in 3 languages. Next week, she was flying to Tokyo for expansion talks. Next month, she was keynoting a conference on international business ethics. She was tired. She was stressed. She was sometimes lonely. But she was hers again. And that was worth every single thing she'd lost. So there it is. Fallon didn't just survive. She thrived. She took the pain of being underestimated and turned it into power. She stopped making herself small and started taking up space. Here's what I want you to remember. You are not decoration. You are not less than. You are not defined by someone else's limited imagination. If you're in a situation where you have to hide who you are to keep the peace, that's not peace. That's just a prettier prison. Hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about people who refused to stay small. And drop a comment. What's one thing you've been hiding about yourself to make someone else comfortable? Maybe it's time to let it out. Remember, the most expensive thing you'll ever pay is the price of pretending to be someone you're not. See you in the next one. Stay true. Stay strong. Stay you. END.